The day I signed my divorce papers, my mother mercilessly told me I had to leave the family home. I told you not to divorce your husband. He has a lot of money. You should have endured a bit longer. Now you're out on the street for being foolish, my mother said as she threw my things on the floor. But she never imagined that a month ago How far can a family go to protect its secrets? Yulia asked herself this question as she signed the final divorce papers, feeling the weight of a life that had never been hers crumble before her eyes. The ink strokes on the pages were final, cold, just like her marriage to Victor. A marriage that, from the outside, appeared perfect. Luxuries, parties, forced smiles for the cameras. But behind closed doors, what should have been a fairy tale was closer to a silent nightmare. The lawyer's office was well lit, but for Yulia, everything seemed to darken around her. When the pen slipped from her hands, she felt an emptiness deeper than she had imagined. She had won her freedom, yes, but at what cost? It wasn't just her life with Victor that had disintegrated. It was everything she had once thought supported her. That feeling of loss followed her as she walked toward her childhood home, seeking refuge in a place where, in her memory, traces of love still lingered. Upon arrival, the large family house seemed the same as always, frozen in time. But something inside warned her not to trust appearances. She opened the door cautiously, noticing an uncomfortable silence in the air. Her mother, Eva, was waiting in the living room, sitting on the couch with an impassive expression. Her father, Tristan, gazed out the window, avoiding her eyes. There was something strange about both of their postures, as if they were expecting something more than her arrival. "Mom, Dad, it's done," Yulia said, trying to find some trace of support in her parents' eyes. Eva looked up, but it wasn't comfort that Yulia found in her gaze. Instead, there was a coldness that froze her chest. "I knew you'd end up like this, Yulia. I always knew you wouldn't be able to keep it up." Eva's words fell like knives. There was no sympathy in her tone, only relentless judgment. "You should have stayed with Victor, endured a little longer." Yulia felt the ground disappear beneath her feet. She couldn't believe what she was hearing. How could her own mother blame her for escaping a marriage in which she had lost every part of herself? "What are you talking about?" she asked, her voice trembling between disbelief and suppressed anger. "You know exactly what Victor put me through. I can't believe you're saying this." Eva let out a bitter laugh, as if her daughter's emotions meant nothing. "You never understood what it means to sacrifice for the greater good. Laura would have. She's always known what it means to be there for the family. But you've always been selfish." Eva stood up and, with no tact whatsoever, said the words Yulia never expected to hear. "You're going to have to leave, Yulia. Laura and her family need this house more than you do. You have nothing now, and we can't keep taking care of you." The blow was brutal, and Yulia felt the pain turn into fury. She looked at her father, seeking some sign of defense, some gesture of support. But Tristan, as always, remained silent, unable to raise his eyes. His gaze lost in the window, absent, was a reminder of all the times he had chosen the easy path, the path of indifference. "And you have nothing to say?" Yulia asked, her words dripping with bitterness. Tristan finally turned his head, but didn't meet her eyes. His voice was low, almost inaudible. "It's better this way, Yulia. There's no room for you here. Laura, she has a family, children. You'll be fine." Yulia felt as if she were drowning. She couldn't believe what she was hearing. It was as if everything that had once meant something to her was crumbling in seconds. Her mother, her father, the people who were supposed to love and protect her, were casting her out like an intruder, as if her worth as a person depended on her marital status or her ability to endure a life of suffering. "I can't believe it!" The words barely left her mouth. Her mind struggled to process the reality unfolding before her. How had it come to this? When had her family become so foreign? Eva looked at her with a mix of superiority and coldness. "You should have done what any strong woman would have done, Yulia. Endured. I'll say it again. That's what Laura, your sister, would have done if she were in your place. And now, you don't even have a roof over your head. Foolish." The words "foolish" echoed in Yulia's mind like a final sentence. The conversation was laced with a poison she hadn't foreseen. Her family, who should have been her refuge in times of storm, were becoming her executioners, pushing her into emotional and physical abandonment. But at that precise moment, something inside her changed. The pain was replaced by an eerie calm. There was something Eva and Tristan didn't know. Something Yulia had discovered recently that would change everything. She said nothing more. It wasn't worth arguing. She looked at her parents, two strangers who didn't deserve her anger, and decided she wouldn't give them the pleasure of seeing her fall. "Fine," she said at last, her voice steadier than she had expected. "I'll leave." Eva raised an eyebrow, surprised by her daughter's calmness. It seemed she had expected more resistance, more pleading, but Yulia didn't give her that satisfaction. "Do it as soon as possible," Eva responded, turning her back and sitting back down on the couch. "You have nothing else to do here." Yulia gathered her things, every movement feeling like a liberation. She walked down the hall of the family home, the house that had once been her home, but now was nothing more than an emotional prison. As she closed the door behind her, she no longer felt the weight of betrayal. She knew that something bigger was coming. She knew that the truth, when it finally came out, would be her greatest weapon. As she stepped onto the street, she took a deep breath. Freedom, as painful as it was hers. And as she walked toward her car, a small envelope in her bag reminded her that she had something her family didn't suspect. A letter, evidence, a secret that would change all of their lives. But that was a game Yulia wasn't ready to play. Not until the perfect moment. Meanwhile, she would prepare. Because sometimes, true power doesn't lie in physical strength or harsh words, but in patience and strategy. Her mother's words still echoed in Yulia's mind as she drove away from the family home. "For being stupid." That phrase, spoken with disdain, was like an echo she couldn't shake. Eva had made it clear what she thought of her, what she had always thought. Yulia had not only lost her husband, but now she was also cut off from her own family. But this expulsion, far from breaking her, ignited a new strength within her. She knew there was something dark and hidden beneath that facade of normalcy that her family tried to project. And in her hands, she already held a crucial piece of that puzzle. The envelope she had found among Victor's documents before the divorce contained letters that shattered the story of her life. Letters that revealed a secret relationship between her sister Laura and Victor long before she had entered the picture. But that wasn't all. The letters hinted that her marriage had been nothing more than a transaction, a deal between families to strengthen alliances and maintain appearances. In this game, Yulia had been nothing more than a disposable pawn. It was no coincidence that her father, Tristan, was involved in Victor's business dealings. As she parked her car in front of the small apartment she had rented weeks earlier as a precaution, Yulia felt the pieces beginning to fall into place. The betrayal didn't just come from Victor. Her sister and her own parents were also implicated. But what she couldn't understand was why. What could have driven her family to do this? She decided she wouldn't leave without uncovering the whole truth. The next morning, Yulia returned to her parents' house. She hadn't given any indication that she would come back. She wanted to see how they acted when they thought they were safe from her presence, when they believed she was no longer a problem. She entered silently, using the key she still had. The house was calm, but the atmosphere felt charged with an invisible tension. Yulia walked down the hallway, her steps silent, until she heard voices in the living room. Eva and Laura were sitting together, speaking in low tones. What at first seemed like casual conversation soon took on a much darker tone. "I told her to leave," Eva commented with disdain. "It's not like she needs to be here. She has no one, she has nothing anymore." "That's for the best," Laura replied, showing no concern. "The farther she is, the better for everyone. She can't find out what we've done." Yulia, standing behind the slightly ajar door, felt a chill run down her spine. There it was, confirmation that there was much more than she had imagined. The air in the room seemed to grow heavier with each passing second, as if the weight of the secrets could no longer be contained. As she listened, she tried to stay calm, but the fire of betrayal burned in her chest. "And Victor?" Eva asked. "What is he going to do now that he's divorced from Yulia? We need to make sure he's also under control." Laura laughed, but there was no joy in her voice. "Victor has always been easy to manipulate. I'll marry him, as it always should have been. And Dad will benefit from all the deals we've made with him. This was just a little detour. Yulia was never meant to be in the way." Laura's words hit like a punch. Not only had her sister been involved with Victor, but Yulia's entire marriage had been a sham, a mere formality so Laura could finally be with him. Yulia had been nothing more than a puppet in her family's twisted game. Her heart raced. Every second she spent listening to that conversation, the hatred and anger grew inside her, but she knew it wasn't time to act. Not yet. She left the house as silently as she had entered. Each step she took away from that place brought her closer to her final decision. Revenge would be cold and calculated. That same afternoon, she decided to confront Laura. She found her at the boutique where she worked occasionally, a high-end shop that Victor had helped her establish. Laura was alone in the back room when Yulia appeared at the door, and for a moment, her sister seemed caught off guard to see her, but she quickly regained her composure. "I didn't expect to see you here, Yulia. Hadn't you left already?" Laura's voice was soft, almost innocent, but Yulia knew that behind that facade lay a very different person. "No, Laura. I haven't left," Yulia replied, slowly stepping closer, her eyes fixed on her sister. "In fact, I've been thinking of staying a little longer. There's so much I don't understand about everything that's happened." Laura forced a smile, but there was something in her eyes that betrayed her nervousness. "Well, Mom and Dad think it's best if you stay away for a while. You know, with the kids and everything, space is a little tight at the house." Yulia couldn't help but give a bitter smile. The hypocrisy of her sister was overwhelming. "That's funny," Yulia said, not looking away, "because it seems to me that space isn't the issue. It's something much deeper, isn't it? Like you and Victor having something going on this whole time. Or like Dad being involved in Victor's shady business. Am I right?" The color drained from Laura's face for a brief moment, but she quickly recovered it, like someone caught red-handed, deciding whether to deny or face it. She chose the former. "What are you talking about, Yulia? Don't be ridiculous. You're seeing things that aren't there." Yulia took another step closer, and this time, her voice was a sharp whisper. "Don't bother lying to me, Laura. I've heard everything. I know about the letters, about the deals with Dad, and I know I should never have married Victor. You wanted him for yourself, and our parents knew everything." Laura blinked, visibly uncomfortable with Yulia's intensity. Her facade was beginning to crumble, and for the first time in a long time, Yulia felt like she was in control. "Listen, Yulia," Laura said, her tone more serious now, without the fake sweetness from before. "Things aren't as simple as you think. It's not as easy as you believe. Victor loves me. He always has. It's just that things didn't turn out as they should have. But now everything is settled. Now that you're out of the way, things can be the way they were always meant to be." Yulia couldn't hold back a bitter laugh. "Is that what you think? That I'm out of the way?" She stepped even closer, until their faces were inches apart. "I'm not out, Laura. I'm just getting started. And when I'm done, none of you will have what you want." Laura stepped back, her expression hardening. The loving sister facade had vanished completely, revealing her true face. "Be careful what you do, Yulia," she warned, her eyes cold as steel. "You don't know what you're getting into." "No, Laura," Yulia replied, "you don't know what you've gotten into." With that final word, Yulia left the store, leaving Laura in silence, motionless, while the tension in the air was palpable. She knew she had lit a spark that would soon become a fire. Now it was just a matter of waiting for the right moment for everything to explode. But Yulia wasn't willing to wait long. She knew the truth was about to come to light, and when it did, everyone's lives would change forever. Hours later, the wind battered the windows of Yulia's apartment as she sat at her desk, staring at the open envelope in front of her. The letters, the documents, everything she had discovered about her family's betrayal seemed to flicker before her eyes like a truth that was finally coming to life. She knew she could no longer postpone the inevitable. She had confronted Laura and destabilized her, but it wasn't enough. She needed more. She needed the whole truth to come out, and for that, she had to make more decisive moves. That afternoon, Yulia made a crucial decision. She would confront her father, Tristan. If anyone could confirm what she suspected about the shady dealings with Victor, it would be him. Her father had always been the silent pillar of the family, the man who stayed on the sidelines, letting Eva handle most of the family matters. But Yulia knew there was more to him than met the eye. There was something her father had been hiding for a long time, and now she was determined to find out. The reunion with Tristan was tense. He hadn't expected to see her, not after the last time when Eva had thrown her out of the house. But when Yulia showed up at his office, a small room hidden in one of the family's properties, he couldn't hide his surprise. Tristan looked at her from behind his desk, uncomfortable, as if he were a stranger looking at his own daughter. "Yulia, I didn't expect you to come here," he said, trying to sound calm, but the tremor in his voice betrayed him. Yulia calmly closed the door behind her. She knew she couldn't lose control. Every word, every movement had to be calculated. This was her chance to confront him and rip the truth from her father. "Dad, I can't keep pretending I don't see what's going on. You know why I'm here," she said bluntly. "I know about Victor's business, I know you're involved, and I know Laura has been in on it from the beginning. You've all been using me this whole time, but not anymore." Tristan took a deep breath, as if he needed a few seconds to process what his daughter had just said. His face, always expressionless, began to show signs of tension. "It's not that simple, Yulia," he finally replied, his voice barely a whisper. "You don't understand the magnitude of what's at stake. These decisions, they're not what they seem. It's much more complicated." Yulia moved closer, her eyes locked on her father's. "Then explain it to me, Dad. Explain why you've been betraying your own daughter to protect Victor. Explain how you could let me marry him, knowing everything he and Laura had. What kind of father does that?" Her voice trembled with restrained rage, but there was also pain, a deep pain that surfaced with each word. Tristan looked away, unable to face her. The years of silence, of passive complicity, finally weighed on him like a stone. Yulia saw her father struggle to find an answer, but she also saw something else: fear. Fear of what could happen if the full truth came to light. "All of this was for the good of the family," Tristan murmured, almost as if trying to justify himself. "Victor was the safest option. I knew that if you married him, everything would be under control. I didn't expect things to go this far. I didn't expect Laura." "Expect Laura what?" Yulia interrupted, moving closer. "That Laura would become his lover? That you, my own father, would let me marry a man who was in love with my sister?" The tension in the room was unbearable. Tristan got up from his desk, pacing back and forth, as if looking for an invisible way out of the situation. But there was no escape. "Yulia, you don't understand how these deals work. Everything I did was to keep the family safe. The marriage to Victor was part of a deal that guaranteed us financial stability. There was no other choice." Yulia looked at him, incredulous. "Financial stability? Is that what mattered to you? Selling me off like I was part of a transaction?" The words came out laced with venom, but the pain behind them was clear. Tristan didn't respond immediately. Instead, he collapsed heavily into his chair, his hands in his head, as if the guilt was finally crushing him. "Everything got out of control," he whispered, almost to himself. "Victor made promises he didn't keep. And when Laura got involved, it was already too late. I couldn't stop it. You didn't even try to stop it, Dad. You just stood there, watching them destroy me." Yulia's words fell like a sentence. Tristan had no answers, no excuses. He knew his daughter was right. Everything he had done out of cowardice, out of fear of losing the security that Victor provided. But that fear, that security, had cost more than he was willing to admit. Yulia watched him in silence, her mind working quickly. She knew her father wasn't the mastermind behind it all, but he was complicit. He had been part of the deals, had allowed everything to happen, and now he had to face the consequences. "I'm going to destroy Victor," Yulia suddenly said, with a coldness that even surprised her own father. "And if you keep protecting him, if you keep holding on to these secrets, I'll destroy you too." Tristan looked up, his eyes filled with panic. "Yulia, please, don't do this. If Victor falls, he'll take everyone down with him. You don't know what he's capable of." "I don't care what he's capable of," she replied. "The only thing that matters to me now is the truth. And if that means everything you've built falls apart, then so be it." Tristan sat in silence, his hands trembling. Yulia had made her choice, and he knew there was no turning back. His daughter was no longer the young woman who could be manipulated by the family's desires. She was now a woman determined to fight for everything that had been taken from her. Later, Yulia left her father's office with a new sense of determination. She had begun to tear down the wall of lies her family had built over the years. Her next stop would be Victor. She couldn't wait any longer. When she arrived at her ex-husband's luxurious office, Yulia noticed how the security team watched her, recognizing her face. The tension in the air was palpable as she walked down the marble corridor, her footsteps echoing in every corner. When she entered the office, Victor was sitting behind his enormous desk, his gaze fixed on some documents. When he saw her, he looked up, surprised, but not intimidated. "What are you doing here, Yulia?" he asked coldly, his voice as icy as ever. Yulia walked toward him calmly, never breaking eye contact. "I'm here for answers, Victor. I already know about Laura, I know about the business with my father. And now, I want to know what you plan to do." Victor smiled, but it was a joyless smile, more of a display of arrogance. "And what do you think you're going to do with that information? Do you think you can stand up to me?" "No, Victor. I'm not going to stand up to you. I'm going to destroy you." The silence that followed that statement was chilling. Victor looked at her with a mix of surprise and disdain, but Yulia didn't back down. This time, she was in control. She knew she had cornered him. And as the tension in the room grew unbearable, the battle for the truth was about to begin. Yulia had stopped being the victim. The silence that fell after Yulia's words seemed to devour the entire room. Victor, sitting behind his imposing desk, looked at her with a mix of disbelief and disdain. It was clear that he didn't take her seriously, not yet. The arrogant gleam in his eyes was evident, as if he were convinced he had everything under control, as if Yulia was nothing more than a passing distraction in his perfectly calculated life. "Destroy me?" he asked, with a tone that barely concealed his mockery. "You know you can't do that, Yulia. You have no idea what you're up against." But Yulia didn't look away. Everything she had endured over the past few years had prepared her for this moment. She wasn't the same woman Victor had controlled, nor the obedient daughter who bent to her family's whims. She had been through fire and emerged stronger. She knew she had the upper hand now, and nothing, not even Victor, could stop her. "Don't underestimate me, Victor," she said firmly, stepping closer to his desk. "I know exactly what I've been up against. For years, you made me believe I was just a pawn in your game, that my life revolved around your plans and those of my family. But that's changed. Now, I'm the one holding the cards." Victor watched her, trying to read her expression. For the first time, his confidence began to falter. He knew Yulia wasn't the same, and that unsettled him. He tried to stay firm, to regain control of the situation. "What do you think you know?" His tone was colder, more calculated. "Everything you think you have isn't enough to touch me. Your parents, your sister, they're all on my side, Yulia. Do you really think you can win this battle alone?" The mention of her family sent a wave of emotions through Yulia, but she didn't give in to the pain. Now wasn't the time for weakness. "I'm not alone," she replied, giving a faint smile that unsettled Victor even more. "Your biggest mistake was thinking you always controlled the board. But you forgot something important. I learned your games too, and this time I'm the one with the proof." Yulia took out her phone and, with a calculated movement, showed him a series of documents and recordings she had gathered. Among them were illegal deals between Victor and Tristan, shady transactions linking them to corrupt businesses, and, most devastating of all, evidence of Victor's secret relationship with Laura while he was still married to Yulia. Victor leaned forward, the color slowly draining from his face. "How did you get all this?" he asked, his voice now trembling. Yulia kept her gaze fixed on him, feeling the control she had longed for. "It doesn't matter how I got it. What matters is that I have everything I need to destroy you. And not just you, Victor. Everything you've built, all the lies you've told, are about to collapse. The press, the courts, the lawyers, everyone will know who you really are." Victor's reaction was immediate. He shot up from his seat, his face twisted with fury. "Don't you dare, Yulia," he shouted, slamming his hands on the desk. "You have no idea what the consequences will be. If I go down, you'll drag your family down with me." The threat hung in the air, but Yulia didn't back down. She had come too far to stop now. "If my family falls, it will be because of their own decisions," she said with a calm that only enraged Victor further. "They betrayed me, allowed this to happen. I owe them nothing. My only loyalty is to myself." Hours later, a family dinner was scheduled for that same night. Eva, Tristan, and Laura had organized the gathering as a sort of reconciliation, or at least that's what they wanted Yulia to believe. But she knew that it was really a desperate attempt to maintain control, to make sure she wouldn't reveal everything she knew. To them, she was still the daughter they could manipulate, the one who needed their approval. Yulia arrived punctually, impeccably dressed, radiating a calm that unsettled her family from the very first moment. Eva greeted her with that cold smile she always used to mask her true intentions. Tristan, as usual, remained silent, observing from a corner, while Laura seemed surprised to see her, though she couldn't hide the discomfort she felt. "I'm glad you came, dear," Eva said, trying to sound conciliatory. "It's good that we can resolve this as a family." Yulia looked at her for a few seconds, letting the words hang in the air before responding. "Yes, Mom. Resolving it as a family sounds good." The dinner began with a strange tension floating in the air. Everyone knew something was wrong, but no one wanted to be the first to mention it. Yulia played her role skillfully, letting them believe everything was still under control. But midway through the evening, when the forced smiles could no longer sustain the lie, she decided it was time to act. "I've been thinking a lot these days," she said, interrupting a shallow conversation between Eva and Laura. "And I've come to the conclusion that it's time to face the truth." Silverware clattered onto plates with a dry sound. Laura looked at her, alarmed, while Eva frowned, trying to understand what was happening. "What do you mean by the truth?" Eva asked, her tone tense. Yulia leaned forward, her eyes fixed on her mother's. "The truth about what's happened in this family. About the secrets, the betrayals. About how you, Dad, and Laura used me for your own interests." Eva's face paled, and Tristan, who had been silent until then, shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "I don't understand what you're talking about," Eva insisted, though her voice no longer had the confidence it once did. "I think you do understand, Mom," Yulia responded with a chilling calm. "You knew Victor was with Laura, you knew Dad was involved in his shady business dealings, and yet you pushed me to marry him, as if I didn't matter. All to protect the family's interests." The silence that followed was unbearable. Laura, who had been quiet, finally spoke, her voice tinged with panic. "Yulia, you're exaggerating. It's not like you're saying. Things aren't that simple." "Oh, really?" Yulia looked at her with a mix of contempt and sadness. "Then explain it to me, Laura. Explain how it was all for you. Was it simple when you were sleeping with my husband while I lived in a lie? Was it simple when Dad decided to sacrifice me for the sake of his business? Or did you all just decide I wasn't worth anything?" Eva, desperate to regain control, stood up from the table. "Everything we did was for the family," she shouted. "We had no other choice. You were never strong enough to handle what it takes to keep this family together." Those words, more than anything else, broke the last thread keeping Yulia silent. "No, Mom," she exclaimed, standing up as well. "What you did was out of selfishness, out of greed. And now, all of you are going to pay the consequences." With that final statement, Yulia pulled out her phone and began playing the recordings. Every word, every secret, every betrayal was exposed in a matter of minutes. The impact was devastating. Tristan slumped in his chair, unable to face reality. Laura wept, unable to come up with excuses, while Eva, for the first time in her life, looked truly defeated. Hours later, Yulia left the family home for the last time. The mansion's lights flickered behind her in the night's darkness. There was no sadness in her heart, only a sense of freedom she hadn't felt in years. She had taken control of her life, and though the price had been high, she knew she had finally found her peace. The truth, though painful, had set her free. The first lights of dawn peeked over the horizon as Yulia walked toward the police station. The air was cold, but the sense of peace and resolution she felt was warm, almost liberating. The truth was no longer a burden on her shoulders, but a beacon guiding her toward the justice she so desperately needed. The time had come to close that dark chapter of her life once and for all and ensure that no one could use or betray her again. As she crossed the police station's doors, she was greeted by an officer who, although not fully understanding the magnitude of what was about to unfold, could see the determination in her eyes. Yulia had brought with her all the documents, evidence, and recordings she had collected about Victor, her father, and the shady deals that had kept her family under the grip of dirty money. "I want to file a report," she said firmly. "I have evidence of fraud, corruption, and money laundering. My ex-husband and my father are involved." The words were strong, but Yulia spoke them with a calm that surprised the officer. It was time to free her family from the chain of lies they had been trapped in, and although she knew the road ahead would not be easy, she was ready to face it all. In the hours that followed, Yulia explained every detail, handed over every document, and told her story with heartbreaking honesty. The officer listened attentively, gradually grasping the depth of the case. He knew that, with the magnitude of the evidence Yulia had brought, the impact would be significant. Victor and Tristan weren't just facing the possibility of losing everything they had built, but also the weight of legal justice now looming over them. Days later, the effects of the report began to take hold. The news leaked to the local press, and soon the media started buzzing about the financial scandal involving Victor and Tristan. Police investigations moved quickly, and within weeks, both were formally charged with fraud and money laundering. But that wasn't the only thing that changed for Yulia. As authorities investigated, it was revealed that the family home, which Eva and Tristan had tried to take from her, legally belonged to Yulia due to a forgotten will from her grandfather. The document, discovered during the investigations, showed that the house had been inherited by her, not her parents, as everyone had believed. With no more legal barriers, the property was transferred to Yulia's name, and for the first time in years, she felt life was giving her back some of the justice that had been stolen from her. At first, Eva and Laura resisted, unable to accept that Yulia now had control, not only over the house, but also over their fates. Both had lived under the illusion that power and financial stability came from Victor, but that security was rapidly unraveling. Despite everything she had suffered, Yulia made an unexpected decision. She could have kicked her family out of the house, severed all ties with them, and enjoyed her victory in solitude. But she didn't. She knew that, despite the betrayals and the pain, Eva, Tristan, and Laura were still her family. Resentment wasn't something she wanted to carry for the rest of her life. She had found power in forgiveness, and although she would never forget what they had done, she wouldn't abandon them completely. One day, she showed up at the house, now her house, with a proposal. Eva, still stunned by the turn of events, looked at her with a mix of disbelief and wounded pride. "Why are you here?" her mother asked, her tone wavering between bitterness and remorse. "You have everything. The money, the house. You don't need anything from us." Yulia watched her for a few seconds, feeling a mixture of emotions. The house felt different now, not like a place of pain, but as an opportunity to start over, even if under different terms. "I'm not here to fight, Mom," said Yulia, her voice firm but compassionate. "This house is mine now, but I'm not going to kick you out." I know what happened, and while nothing can erase what you did to me, I don't want to destroy you. I want us to start again, differently." Eva looked at her in disbelief. Her pride fought to accept the fact that her daughter now held the power. For the first time in her life, she realized that Yulia had grown, that she was no longer the weak and manipulable daughter she had always believed she would be. "Why are you helping us?" she finally asked, not fully understanding. Yulia sighed, feeling the weight of the emotions that had tormented her for so long. "Because despite everything, I'm still part of this family. But things change now. I'm in control, and if we're going to move forward, it will be on my terms." Over time, things began to improve for Yulia. She regained her life, not only emotionally, but financially as well. With the funds she had obtained from Victor's legal compensations, she opened her own business, something she had always dreamed of, but never had the courage to pursue. She became a successful entrepreneur, known for her ethics and determination, and for the first time in years, she felt her life had a purpose that didn't depend on anyone else. But what surprised everyone was how Yulia, despite all she had suffered, chose to extend a hand to her family. Even though power and money were now on her side, she never used them to humiliate or subjugate Eva, Laura, or Tristan. Instead, she chose compassion, and little by little, they began to rebuild the bonds that had seemed irreparably broken. Eva, although she never apologized directly, showed in her own way that she regretted how she had treated Yulia. Tristan, after facing the legal consequences of his actions, remained in the background, grateful that his daughter hadn't completely abandoned him. Laura, for her part, distanced herself from Victor, and while the relationship between the sisters never returned to what it once was, they began to meet on a ground of mutual respect. Yulia had learned a crucial lesson in her life. True power wasn't in money or control, but in the freedom to choose how to face adversity. She had had the option to destroy her family, but instead, she chose something much more powerful: forgiveness and rebuilding. The truth had been her weapon, but compassion was her final victory. And now, with all the power and freedom at her fingertips, Yulia had found something far more valuable than any fortune: her inner peace. If you liked this story, I invite you to leave a comment about how it made you feel. And if you've been through a similar betrayal, I'd love for you to share your valuable opinion. I would be deeply honored if you left a like, shared the video with a friend or family member, and subscribed to the channel. Don't miss the next surprising story that's popping up on your screen right now. We have entertainment guaranteed just for you. See you in the next video.